Welcome to Healing the Tigress, a podcast of stories and conversations on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a licensed clinical social worker and certified breastfeeding peer counselor,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist with a perinatal mental health certification. Both of us are Taiwanese American mothers and survivors of postpartum depression and anxiety.
We don't know about you, but we didn't grow up talking much about mental health in our families, and we want to change that now that we are mothers.
Together, with our clinical backgrounds and passion on the subject, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to discuss perinatal mental health issues.
And together, we want to break generational cycles in our own parenting journeys so that we can heal our inner tigress, a nod to the tiger moms before us. We are so happy you're tuning in here. Let's get started. Hey folks, welcome back to Healing the Tigress. Before we dive in, just wanted to give you guys a heads up that this episode is a little different because life happens to real moms, real life, and I, Peggy, unfortunately couldn't make it to the recording. Jasmine holds down the fort with an amazing episode with this next guest, so you definitely want to stay tuned. As I got to listen to it, I honestly was so into it and really having FOMO that I couldn't be there. But just wanted to give y'all a heads up. Sit tight for a really great conversation. And I'll probably insert some of my thoughts at the very end. But you're in for a great episode.
Hello, listeners. Our next guest on this show is someone that I had the pleasure of virtually meeting last summer as we were both panelists in the monthly Coloring the Conversation discussion for AAPI Heritage Month. And Coloring the Conversation is hosted by the Perinatal Mental Health Alliance for People of Color. And it's a fully funded program within Postpartum Support International, or PSI, to expand its reach to bridge gaps in perinatal mental health support, especially in communities of color. And so you may hear me refer to it as the Alliance from here on out for short. And today we have here with us Divya Kumar, who actually is one of the co-founders of the Alliance. And Divya is a South Asian American psychotherapist with a public health background. She specializes in perinatal mental health, trauma, and the life transitions related to pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting. She is especially passionate about holding space for folks of color and folks who identify as first and second generation immigrants as they navigate the transition into parenthood. Divya, you wear so many hats and have such a rich resume of work in the public health and perinatal mental health space. So, would you mind telling us a little bit more about what you have worked on and what you're currently doing before we dive into your own perinatal mental health story? And maybe even just like what inspired you to co found the Alliance?
Oh my gosh. First of all, Jasmine, it's so wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor, and it was so wonderful to meet you. And when we did that event for the Alliance in May, and I always say we need more of us. And so whenever I meet more of us, I'm like, oh, now you're mine and we're going to be together forever. So to just like you said, I had the public health background and I did women's health, repro justice, anti-violence work. And I created and ran a program for violence prevention and response at MIT. I had a second baby, left that job. I'll probably talk more about that because that was when I fell into the very bad place. And I started running new parents groups in my neighborhood. And I was like, oh, I love sitting with new parents and hearing their stories and bearing witness. And I was like, somebody pays me to do this. It's wild. And I became a postpartum doula and lactation counselor. And I kind of always had the programmatic piece, and because you can't fully take the girl out of public health, I think. And I created programs to integrate comprehensive perinatal support into existing systems of care and community health centers. And right around that time, I went to a PSI conference for the first time. It was 2016. And I went to the conference in San Diego, and I met Jabina Coleman and Desiree Israel. And I think we were 3 out of maybe a handful of folks of color in the room. And, you know, you go into this big professional space, and I was like, oh, where are the Black and brown faces? Oh, here you are. Hello. I don't know you. You don't know me, but hi. And it was very clear, like we all kind of sort of found each other. And I remember that there was a breakout space for folks who had a specific lived experience. I think it was psychosis. It was a time where all of those folks could gather. And I was thinking, I was like, why is there a place where we could gather all folks of color? Could we have like a designated space for us? And, you know, I got their contact information and we were like, we should create something. What could we create? And, you know, it came to be because we were really tired of seeing race and racism and oppression as like bullet points on a slide deck, right? There's maybe one slide or maybe a couple bullet points of like, oh, also race and racism can affect perinatal mental health. And we were like, why? It is perinatal mental health. You can't unpair these things if this is the way you walk through the world. And so we wanted to create something for us and by us so it could really encompass all of the lived experience and not have it be relegated to like the sidebar issue and bullet points on a slide. And our initial thinking was like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a map, kind of like on the PSI webpage, there's a map and you can click on your state. What if we had a map so that people could look here and click on where they are and see all of the perinatal mental health providers of color in their area? That was our original thing, just so that folks could find resources more easily. Because when you're in the very bad, dark place, sometimes I want to talk to somebody named Anisha or Marisol or Jabina. You know, I'm like, who is that? Is there a person of color, somebody who's a little culture, ethnic, something? Maybe they will understand me a little bit better. That's kind of how it came to be. And in early 2017, we approached Wendy and said, like, would you consider having this be part of PSI? And she was like, I would really love this. It seems like the right time.
Wow. But I see on the website it says that you guys weren't fully funded until 2022.
That's
So,
right.
so they PSI helped you start it, but they didn't fully fund the program until then?
So that's a really good question, Jasmine. And we were right away, like as of March of 2017, we were considered a program within PSI. But we did not have, there was not money for the Alliance. Like we were volunteers. We were always acknowledged as co-founders. We were all volunteers. We did this work for free. And then PSI was able to get like a really wonderful, generous grant to fully fund the Alliance in 2022. And that was when they could bring on a director and paid staff and social media and do all the things. But the Alliance did exist before then, but it was really 5 years old before it was fully funded. And it was amazing. Obviously, it was so wonderful to finally see the thing. It was like raising. I say this now because I have 2 teenagers, and my older one is a high school junior, and which is just wild. The time I don't understand. But you raise these children, and they you kind of let them go. So that's kind of how it's been. We kind of like we created it, and we really fought for it. We had to kind of create some room for it and advocate for meetups at the conferences that we hosted and ran, and really built this community. It was very cool because in 2017, we were in Philly. In 2018, we were in Houston. And we had just huge turnouts to the meetups that we ran. And there were people who were like, I did not know that PSI was for me, but I see the Alliance and I understand that PSI is for me. And to me, we were all like, oh my God.
Yeah, I can so resonate with that because I mean, that's the whole purpose, maybe even for us starting this podcast, was even just like, I want to hear more stories and see more representation of people that look like me, that are in my community, that have spoken out to say, like, this is something that I went through and that it's normal, that it's happening and it's not just being swept under the rug, you know? And so, kind of along the same lines, like creating that space for us, even to have this discussion, for any of this to happen. And I think it's so huge that PSI was willing to take you under its wing. And, like you said, also, even in a way, like expose people in our community to the resources that PSI has. Because you don't see something, you don't see something that looks like you promoting it or using it, just sort of like touting it. You're kind of like, well, that's not for me, that's just for white people. But that's not like no, like all moms need this sort of help, right? Whether you're white, whether you're of color, we all kind of struggle through some of the similar themes, similar undercurrents, right? Even if there's a cultural layer, there's a lot of things that, like, I think we can bring in and bring out to help more moms of color.
And we also 100%, we also wanted to grow the professional community, right? We wanted to bring professionals of color. The goal of the Alliance was, of course, to meet the needs of individuals and families and communities who were struggling with perinatal mental health stuff, but also to grow the professional pool, to be able to say, all of you who are interested in perinatal health, who are folks of color, come here. PSI is also for you. This organization is for you. We offer training. Come to this conference. We're here. And when we go to these professional spaces, we often feel like we have to cut ourselves in half. Like we don't show up as our full selves. We have to like do the code switching and be the sort of like, yes, I'm a professional, blah, 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 without being like, can we talk about the racism that we experience as professionals, or if like our clients say inappropriate things to us, and to really be able to integrate all of that together so that people don't feel like they have to separate pieces of themselves. They can show up as their full selves. Does that make sense?
I love that. That's completely true. And I know we sort of gone on a tangent because this is such an important like discussion for people to know about, but I want to bring it back to your own personal journey because it sounds like it really sort of shifted your career path and the things you're passionate about today. So, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into motherhood? Maybe some of the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders that you might have encountered along the way too.
Yes, of course. I think it's so wonderful when we get to talk about our own stories, because so often we don't. So I appreciate you asking. Um, so my kids are 16 and a half and 14, so they're older. So this was a while ago. I did have postpartum depression. It kind of set in relatively quickly after my son was born. I know now that there were many aspects of his birth that were traumatic. And now I kind of understand how they affected my transition into being a mom. And at the time, like, you'll tell me, I don't want to give too many details because I don't want to say anything that's too triggering or upsetting for people who are listening. But basically, I needed to have a repair after my son was born. That was not part of the plan. And I needed to have an epidural and go to the OR after my son was born. And it was like, it was really, really awful. And I understand it as traumatic now because I'm a therapist, and I'm like, oh, I was in such a fawn response state. They were like, it's going to be okay. I was like, just fix it. It's fine. Yes, just fix it. Whatever you like. Yes, whatever you say, I will do whatever you want. Just fix the thing. And it took me a long time to really recover. I had a really difficult recovery over the next few days. And it completely affected my ability to connect and bond with this baby. And I was like, I have no idea what to do with him. People would give me the baby and I'd be like I knew he was mine. I didn't have the thing where I was like, did he come out of me? I did know, but I was like, somebody else take him. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I felt like everybody was an expert. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And what happened was that I was able to breastfeed, and that breastfeeding actually went pretty well. And I had a lot of milk. And so I kind of clung onto that, and it became this portal into this really weird OCD experience. I really shouldn't label it as weird, but it was atypical to me and never explicitly named. And so a lot of my understanding of my experience was like, looking back, I'm like, what happened? And now that I'm a professional, I'm like, I had terrible OCD. Nobody diagnosed
You weren't a therapist at that time, just to set the stage.
No, I was not a therapist. I worked at MIT. I worked with survivors of sexual violence, and I helped them advocate for the services that they needed. And I did workshops on healthy relationships and, what to do if you were a resident advisor, if somebody disclosed that they've been assaulted. I did that. I knew a little bit about mental health, but not a lot. I had this whole soup of depression, anxiety, and OCD after my son. I definitely white knuckled through it, and I was better by the time I got pregnant again. The issue also was my son was he was a really difficult toddler, and he had all these feeding issues. He wouldn't eat and he wouldn't gain weight. And so we did do all this feeding, speech, and OT therapy for him. And that, of course, was like, completely exacerbating my anxiety and OCD. And he wouldn't eat. So what did I had to breastfeed him all the time. I was like breastfeeding around the clock. He's a year old. And when I got pregnant with my daughter, I was like, okay, I'm going to do a bunch of different things. I'm going to come at this differently. I talked about how the pushing experience was traumatic. I switched to a midwife. She was like, okay, we're going to do non-directed pushing. All of this isn't going to happen again, etc. And it was amazing and redemptive in so many ways. And the birth was so much better. And none of the bad things happened again in terms of the trauma. And somehow I decided that I was going to quit my job because I was like, I really want to focus on being home. My mother worked all the time. She was like not home a lot. I was like, I'm going to be home with my kids. I don't want to pump again. I just want to really enjoy this time with them. I'm never going to get it again. And it was very bad because I did not enjoy it. I became very depressed. I became very anxious. My son was a very difficult toddler. And I was home with 2 babies. And it was like, the walls were just, I developed postpartum rage, which I literally didn't know was a thing until just a few years ago. Nobody ever named that for me. And I never told anybody about it because it was so shameful. Like, how can you yell at babies? You are a monster, right? If you're doing something like that. And I remember yelling and feeling out of control. And I would just see like these 2 sets of eyes. So that look like mine. They're just like this, right? And in the spring of 2010, my daughter was like 7 or 8 months old. I started having issues with breastfeeding. And now I had quit my job. I'd stayed home so I could nurse this baby and not pump. And then I had a lot of difficulty with breastfeeding all of a sudden. And then the OCD like came back with this like roaring vengeance. And I was such this dark, helpless, spirally place that I felt like nobody understood. I probably should have been hospitalized that summer, but I wasn't. And I just felt like I felt like I was never going to get better. I did see a therapist. She was so lovely. She was such a wonderful person, but I think that I needed more care than she could give. We have a mother baby day program about an hour away from where I am. I don't know exactly when that was formed. I think it was around then. I would have been a really good candidate for that if somebody had connected those dots. It's also possible that I don't think I was telling everybody what was going on.
Now, you mentioned OCD. Can you describe maybe a little bit of what you think was an obsession or a compulsion that you were having?
I had a lot of very, very specific like obsessions about how many times I would need to breastfeed in 24 hours in order to maintain my milk supply. And it was not necessarily rooted in reality. And then I would have a whole bunch of rituals and compulsions. There were so many rituals and compulsions. I would order more supplements. I would order all of these supplements. They were expensive. I would take twice the amount that was, written on the bottle. And you're a pharmacist, really don't do that. And I would have this very specific, the rituals were really, really, now I'm like, oh my God. I would have this very specific amount of water that I would have to drink at specific times of the day. Like if I had been out of the house a lot in the morning and I hadn't brought all my liquids with me, I would freak out because I would be like, I'm behind in my fluids. And my husband would be like, what are you doing? And I was like, no, I have to have all of these ounces of water. I have to have all of these supplements. We would go away for the weekend and I would have bags of like fenugreek and Galacta. And I went to see an acupuncturist and then I went to see another acupuncturist, but I never told them that I was seeing each other. I was like, I need all of the help. If I don't go to all of these appointments, I will not be able to breastfeed. It was like that. It was so confining. And I was like, well, I can't leave the house for this amount of time because I can't bring all the water. What if I don't have all my water?
Yeah, it was really limiting your ability to function and live your life because it was all centered on that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And thank you for like indulging me in the specifics because I think it can be helpful to listeners to see like, well, what does it mean to be like that and kind of connect with it? So I thank you for sharing that because that's very helpful.
Of course, stigma and shame, they die a little bit more when we bring these things out into the open.
And so you mentioned that, how did you get over that? And when did you become a therapist?
Oh my gosh. I think if I'm honest, Jasmine, I don't think I really, really got over it until maybe my daughter was 2. I think so. It lasted a good long time. I was much more functional. I will also say that I hadn't gotten my period back. So it's so interesting to understand the hormonal connections, right? And like one of the acupuncturists I saw, she was so lovely. She was just so kind and so kind. She was like, I think if you get your period back, you're going to feel better, and to sort of cycle again. And I did get it back when my daughter was about a year old, like within a week of her first birthday. And so things were a little bit more settled. And I think I also kind of had it in my head of like, I need to breastfeed until her first birthday. And so there was something that kind of got eased a little bit. It probably took me a couple of years until I really felt much better. If I'm honest, I probably had like flickerings of OCD, like about breastfeeding even after that. But I did really feel much more myself, and I was not as limited, like you were saying. I was much more able to live my life. And around then, I started running these new parent groups. And so it kind of like, I sort of entered into this postpartum support world. And I decided to go back to school and be a therapist because at the time, it was like, I don't know, 2016, I was working in my local community health center as part of these pilot programs, screening new parents with the Edinburgh, which is a standard screening tool for depression. And oftentimes, and it was an amazing job. I loved it so much. I got to be a postpartum doula in people's homes and help them breastfeed and just, how's it really going? What kind of support do you need? And so many times I would connect people to therapists. And I was out to dinner with my husband one night and I was like, oh my God, I should have gotten the dual MSW and PH. Like, why didn't I do that? And he was like, you should go back to school. And I was like, but I'm going to be 40, like when Harry Met Sally, which is such a funny movie. And he just like didn't bat an eye. And he was like, well, my mom went back to school to get her doctorate when my sister and I were 12 and 10. And I was like, oh, I can go back to school. So I went back to school. So if anybody is listening, and I'm sure people are listening, you're never too old and it's never too late to do what you want to do. And so I went to school for social work, and my kids were 10 and 8 at the time. So it was cool. They got to see their mom go back to school.
Yeah, I think, even in a way, like how you're mentioning, like you're never too old to go back to school. You're never too old to like chase your dreams kind of thing. And for your kids to be old enough to actually see that though, I think that's a great, like, I feel like that's great motivation for them, modeling for them, that you can always do things that like you aspire to do. And at any point in your life, as long as you have the passion for it, right? So that's really cool.
They walked across the stage with me when I got my diploma and I graduated. I was like, this is, all of us did this together. It was really, I think it was, and what was cool is that when I think I posted on Facebook because I'm an old person about going back to school. It was wild how many people were like, oh yeah, my mom went back to school when I was in middle school or high school. So it seems like this is a thing that people do. And everybody was like, it was so cool. It was awesome that my mom did this. We just thought that she was completely fierce and boss.
That's great. And, since your kids are a little bit older, do you think that it was a lot harder for you to get help back then just because mental health wasn't talked about as much at that time?
That's a really good question. And it's interesting because I feel like we certainly did not have all of the social media. And I have a very love-hate relationship with social media. And I see sometimes therapists are on social media posting in their reels and their stuff. I'm like, girl, are you working? Like, it's like a job. And like, I love patients with the Alliance. I'm like, this is literally your job. And I'm like, can you post this for me? It's amazing. But there's so much information out there. A lot of it is terrible. And a lot of it is life-saving, just life-saving. I didn't know that there was PSI. I didn't know any of that. Whereas, if anybody's listening to this, like if you are having a perinatal mental health concern, look up PSI. You can take this device, which giveth and taketh, and look at PSI's Instagram, contact somebody, get some help. My son was born in 2007. I think I joined Facebook in 2008. but there weren't the same types of community. There was like this era of like the mommy blogging that I was like, this is not for me. I don't really do this. There was no culturally responsive care. There was no you, Jasmine. There was no Healing the Tigress podcast. It was all this predominantly white world. There were supports, right? There were therapists, there were support groups, but it was not for me. What was always one of the only people of color in the room, certainly the only Asian American in the room.
Well, that kind of leads to my next question is that I feel like you and I, for you, being a person of South Asian descent, that probably painted your experience with postpartum depression, anxiety, and OCD, that for you seeking help, that was really hard. You didn't see anyone that looked like you.
Yes, I didn't see anybody who looked like me. And again, it comes back to this having to cut ourselves up, right? And having to explain pieces of our culture to a therapist who may be lovely and well-meaning. But I'll put it to you this way. The therapist that I see now is a Desi woman, and she's amazing. And I've been seeing her. I started to see her when I was in social work school, because they tell you when you go to social work school, they're like, you're going to need to see a therapist. And I was like, I'm good. I was not good. But I started seeing her in the spring of 2018, and she was like, tell me a little about you, family, da da da. And I was like, my parents had an arranged marriage, and she was like, and I've seen white therapists before. Whenever I say that, they're often very nice. They're like, oh, what was that like for you? And can you say more about that? Like the therapist-y responses, which are totally fine. But she was like, yeah. It was like I said, I went to the grocery store and I bought orange juice and paper towels and cereal. It wasn't like she assumed that she knew everything about me, but I did not have to explain all of that to her. I didn't have to start like, well, I grew up in this culture with a normalization and glorification of struggle and sacrifice, particularly for women. Da, 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 da. She knew certain things. And so this kind of support really wasn't available to me at the time. And, I think in a way, I was kind of like a bad Indian girl, if that makes any sense. I had moved away from my culture in so many ways as a response to racial trauma, really. And I was like, I'm not Indian like that. I was not a person who went to affinity spaces in college or sought out all that the cultural Desi stuff that like exists out there. But I was like, this isn't for me. And so what was surprising is how some of this stuff kind of came back postpartum, because I was like, no, I put this over here. But like, this is like before. No, I feel like I made all these choices that my parents might necessarily not have hoped for me. I made a lot of mistakes and missteps, particularly as a teen. And after that, I was kind of like, I just want to be a mom. I want to be good at this. I want to love this and come into this place of enjoyment. And I really did not. And because of that, I felt very, very ungrateful and guilty because, and you understand this, we grew up with we came here with not very much. We worked very hard so you could have everything, so you could have all these wonderful choices. Everything we did for you so that you could have everything. Now, and my mother had postpartum depression, and she talked about it too, which is pretty radical, for a woman of that generation to speak honestly about it. She was alone. She had nobody. She was alone in this country. She was with my dad, but like, her family's, she didn't have a support system. And she suffered so much. I'm like, I have this wonderful husband. I have these 2 healthy babies. I have a home. My husband has a job, and I am not happy. So I really felt like, well, and I'm kind of like, my mother did this. She survived this, and I can't do it. So there must be something very wrong with me, and perhaps I am unfit to be a mother. So that's how the culture kind of piled on of like, I am so lucky and so privileged to quit a job to be this like person of leisure at home with her kids. How dare you complain?
Yeah, and I don't think we name that very often, that guilt we take on as a result of all of our parents' sacrifices that end up sort of piling on top of us in this sort of invisible way. It's like how we value like a sort of martyrdom, right? Like for their sacrifices.
100%. And I think that I had always been like, well, they worked hard, but like, I'm going to be a musician and I'm going to go to public health school and I'm going to marry a white man and I'm going to be this radical, like free-spirited person. And it was they were like, yes, we love her. And of course, my parents love me very much. And they were like, she makes some interesting choices. Okay. But now it was like, I really had everything that I ever wanted. And like, what is the problem? Everything is okay. What's wrong?
Yeah. And I think that's where we need to learn some of those things on how to give ourselves grace for that, which we were never taught or modeled because our parents just stuffed everything down, right? They weathered through it, and that's all we ever saw. We just saw that they didn't complain or talk about these things.
No.
So to us, it's not normal to like talk
No,
about
it's like
it.
weird and indulgent. Like, why would you do that? And also, what is anybody going to do about it? Like, there's very like, what's the point? You're going to talk. So nobody can solve the problem. Like, so what's the point? Just deal with it.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting. We're talking about this. I know you and I were both recently in, and Peggy were in an article about by Asian American News, and that was kind of something that we sort of, I think, kind of brought up too, like that we don't just talk about with our parents and their sufferings and stuff. We almost feel like it's not in our place to be able to talk about feelings. And so this sort of continues. And we're in this generation, I think, which is nice that we're starting to break these cycles.
Yes.
We're trying.
But yeah. And this is something that I think about all the time and something I talk about with clients too, of like, oh, we're trying to do this differently.
And that's hard. And, it's really hard also just in the parenting space, right? It can be really hard when you want to parent in a certain way that's different than how you were parented, because now you know about the importance of mental health. We just don't have a model to emulate. And so, kind of like in your line of work or what you've experienced in your own parenting journey, is there any advice you'd offer to other AAPI folks, especially second generation people? Like, we're trying to bridge tradition, right? Culture in a place that we have these kind of bicultural identities. Do you have any advice for those kinds of parents?
Oh my gosh, this is where I'm like, okay, buckle up, everybody. This is what I think. I think about this and I talk about this with clients all the time, because a lot of times people are like, what are we doing? I don't know. I don't want to do it this way, that like you sit here, you do what I'm told, don't ask why, just do it. And then I live in a neighborhood that's like, there's a lot of groovy white people and they're wonderful, but they're like, we just let the children lead. And I'm like, is there a Goldilocks? Is there like a middle ground here? Because there's gotta be. So I think there's a couple pieces. One piece is about like the feelings, right? That the parenting in terms of how do we think about feelings? How do we understand what we are feeling? How do we connect with our own nervous system and co-regulate and communicate about feelings to our children? Because that stuff was never modeled for me. And I think I could talk about co-regulation forever, but to me, I think that's such a key cornerstone of intergenerational healing, right? To be able to.
Can you explain a little bit though about co-regulation? That's a term I've recently heard from actually another South Asian mom friend of mine who said that she's been introduced to this, that she needs to start doing this more with her kids. So I kind of want to hear a little bit more about your take on it and what you want to share.
Oh, yeah. Co-regulation is probably the most important thing we do as parents. It is the idea that we calm ourselves. And it's almost like our kids like connect with our nervous system in order to calm theirs. Like by connection with our calm, we calm them and they learn how to calm themselves. So parenting is so triggering, right? It like brings up all of it's like somebody shakes the hornet's nest and everything is like, or like the zombie hands of all the buried feelings are just doing this. And one of the biggest pieces for me has been coming to reckon with my own nervous system and my own reactivity, stemming from the fact that nobody ever co-regulated for me and with me. So it's the idea of like calming yourself as you calm your child. We do this in a whole bunch of different ways, right? Like if you have a small child who is having a tantrum, or like they're really upset because they built this whole tower of Legos and it fell down, and they're like, "Ah!" And you're like, oh no, you're so frustrated. That's so awful. That's so sad that happened. You work so hard, and you're naming the feelings, and you're sort of showing empathy, and they can connect with your calm, and you sort of demonstrate. You often make it down on their level, offer hugs, and being with, right? For me, I was like, oh my God, okay, what are we gonna do? And it's just like, child is distressed. Oh my gosh, I have to fix it right now. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it just goes up, 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 up. If you're going up, 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 what's happening to the child? They're also doing this. And it's so hard because, again, coming back to this, like, what is somebody going to do? I am programmed to, okay, do something, fix it. When really, what do we have to do? We have to be with the child and bear witness and be able to say, like, gosh, you're having all these feelings. I will help you hold them. I see them. That's okay. This is a lot right now. You're so disappointed. You worked on this thing. I mean, even just the other night, my older one came downstairs and he had to fill out this form for school. And he was so frustrated because he hadn't realized that he had to finish it. And he was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, and I wanted to be like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to email somebody? And then I was like, okay. Oh, that sucks. I'm sorry. That's really frustrating. And then I did a very Indian mom thing. I was like, do you want an ice cream? There's ice cream in the refrigerator. We have a saying in our house: if you love somebody, say it with carbs. I was like, here, have a sweet. And he was like, oh yeah. So there's a little bit, but it's basically like, for me, being able to co-regulate, I feel, again, it's intergenerational healing, right? To be able to be with and to just chill for 1 second and see that, like, the child is having an issue. It's not your fault. You don't have to fix it, especially as they get older. We can't fix it. I can't take the math test that you didn't get a good grade on. Maybe I can rebuild the Lego tower, but you can't fix it. And the thing is that I did not have co-regulation. And so I learned that I could not rely on attachment figures for a certain type of emotional support. Because it would be too much for them and it was going to make that worse for me. And so what happened? I navigated through a lot of hard things by myself. I do not want this for my children. I don't want that. I want them to come to me. And as they get older, there's going to be bigger things and more things. And I don't want them to shut out their emotional experience from me because I'm not going to be able to co-regulate. I don't want them to be like, well, I can't tell my mom, she's just going to freak out. And like, then I'm going to have to take care of her.
Yeah, that's really deep. The whole, like, if I brought this to my parents, this is how they would react. I don't think I can deal with the amount of, the level of energy that comes out when they freak out about something, right? I think a lot of like second generation Asian Americans probably can relate to that their parents have this sort of explosive reaction or just sort of take it the other direction. And so we learn to hide. We learn to hide things. We hide things really well, right?
Yes. And I don't want that. I mean, of course I can say it, who knows what they're going to do, but most of the time they do come to me. And I hope, I'm trying to, as parents, we can't control any of this. It's like that Khalil Gibran poem on children, like, they come through you, but they are not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. We can't control what they're going to do. We can just try to lay the groundwork. So that's a co-regulation piece. And then coming back to what you were saying before, so part of it is like, how do we parent in a way that sort of combines all these different things, right? Because if we weren't parented in this way, how do we figure it out? I also think, the culture piece, and I mentioned this in this article that we were in, sometimes I think it's important to remember that culture happens in it's not just like Asian culture in a vacuum, right? It's the culture in the context of racism, migration, trauma, people whose parents experienced war, partition, all those kinds of things. So it's not necessarily just Asian culture in a vacuum. But, it's often in a response to the socio-political, cultural, like, context that people are in. So that's always my disclaimer about culture. but I am trying so hard to talk about feelings, dealing with the emotions, being honest and candid. Like, I don't have all the answers. They don't really teach a class on how to parent. Sometimes I mess it up. I'm going to try to say I'm sorry. Did our parents ever say
No,
they were sorry?
no. And I write about
No.
that. I write about that a lot. Just like the whole, I definitely apologize a lot more to my daughter than my parents ever would, or I'm not even sure if they ever would, but I don't
Well, and
know.
that's attachment, right? It's the rupture and repair. You do the repair. And so I'm just trying to unlearn in so many ways and hold the both ands. Like, I know that my parents did the best that they could. And also I am trying to do differently. Like the narratives about being selfish, right? I'm unlearning so many of those things. I can take care of myself and not be selfish. And also taking care of myself means that I'm a better mother. I don't want my kids to have this mother martyr nonsense that I grew up. It wasn't good for anybody. It wasn't good for me. And so I think about, like, I talk to clients about bushwhacking, and I'm kind of like, there is a path, and you are like, have like a big old stick or like a machete, and you're just kind of carving it. It's hard. It's tiring without models. It's often lonely and isolating because you're like, I'm doing this by myself. And my advice is to be patient and gentle and curious. And you're changing and adapting neural pathways in your brain. You would never tell somebody who had never run before, like, go run a marathon tomorrow. You'd be like, okay, well, we're going to do this little training program where you walk for a minute, you run for 30 seconds. So you have to kind of work on it. And it sometimes it's these like micro things of like, do as you're told, or like, let the children be free. I'm kind of like, how do we, what is the middle? Like when you have teenagers, sometimes I'm like, why are they behaving like this? And my husband will be like, they're just teens. But like, what is they're just teens versus like, I understand that you're upset, and also you cannot use me as your emotional punching bag because that is hurtful and it's not acceptable. So I'm constantly trying to like braid and find this middle ground. And so that's the piece of like the emotion stuff. And then there's the actual like cultural heritage stuff. And I often tell folks, and my advice would be to think about what is important to you that you want to hold on to from how you were raised. And again, knowing that it's not necessarily in your control, because you might like, I grew up eating Indian food every night, and I don't cook it all that often. In fact, my very white husband will cook more Indian food than I do. Oh my God, my parents they adore him. And if there are things that your kids don't take on and don't adapt as their own, to make space for your own grief and loss. And I know that some things are just going to be gone when my parents leave this earth. And, my mother died a few years ago, and a big piece of the grief that I didn't anticipate, that I was like, there's just things that I don't know how to do, that I never took from her, and that my kids will never know. And that is sad. And I have to grieve and mourn that, and also figure out how to let it go, because they're their own people. I don't know if that answered your question. That was like a long road.
No, that was great. I think there was action and actionable steps, and just sort of like acknowledgement of the fact that we're not going to be able to do it all.
No.
You can't, but you can take pieces of things that you valued the most and try to make it your own, because our parenting journey is not going to look the same as our parents. There's just no way that that's going to happen, especially growing up where we, being part American, there's just different things that you experience here being in the bicultural world. But I think it can still be beautiful. Like, you can still incorporate a lot of things and make it your own. And you mentioned that your kids are multiracial, multicultural. So, I mean, do you have any ways on navigating race or racism and culture for them?
Oh my gosh. Yes. This is also something that I think and talk about. And I'm sure if they could hear me, they'd be like, okay, yes, you're talking about race and culture again. Cool. But they do, they think it's interesting and important. And it's just so front of mind, raising multiracial brown kids. What is their experience going to be like? And, like you were saying, their experience is just so profoundly different than mine. Both my parents were from India. They were immigrants. They had similar professional backgrounds. it was not a monoculture because India is this incredibly vast country and people are very diverse, but like they were much more the same than my husband and I are, right? And my kids are growing up in a culture where, in a place where they have parents who grew up in this country. Whereas my mom was like, I don't understand this. What is it that the teenagers are doing? I didn't grow up here. This is all different to me. Don't do that. And I was like, helpful. Thank you. Whereas, you know, we can be like, oh, you know, when I went to school, this is kind of how it's like. And obviously nobody goes to the mall anymore. But one of the biggest differences is that when I was their kids, when I was my kids' ages, I had experienced so much terrible racial trauma from growing up in white suburban Connecticut. And so much of who I was as a kid and a teen was shaped by all of that. And I really wanted to erase anything that was Indian from my identity and really sought proximity to whiteness as safety. And I never ever wanted my kids to experience that. And when I became a parent, that was when I was like, wait a minute, I have this culture. I have this racial identity. What is this all about? And I kind of came back to it when I became a parent. And I, more than anything, I want my kids to feel comfortable identifying as Indian or Desi or AAPI or however it is, or multiracial, and not feel like they have to run away from it in order to belong. Whereas I was like, literally like, can I scrub it off? Can I make myself something else so that I will feel like the world is mine? And they just don't feel that way. I want them to be able to pronounce words correctly and to be able to enjoy spicy food. Thank God they're like, yeah, put more cayenne pepper. Like, it's good. It's spicy. And like, they know that you don't say chai tea. That's like saying TT. And they'll be like, oh my God. And my son was like, in the new Spider-Man movie, they make fun of people who say chai tea. He's like, it's so funny. And I was like, I'm glad that you understand this humor reference.
I've learned also you're not supposed to say like non-bread because that's like saying bread, right?
Yep. Right. Exactly. And he was like, oh my God, this kid's saying non-bread. And I was like, bro. I was like, yes. So, you know, I want them to be able to hold on to all of this because they want to, because they're like, this is part of me. Whereas my mother was like, you need to learn this. You need to da-da-da. And I was like, nope. See you never. I want them to have peers who are kids of color, so they don't have to like be like they have to be around white people to feel safe. And thankfully, you know, they have all kinds of friends, kids of color, white friends. It's all good. My daughter has a couple of friends who are multiracial, white and Asian kids, and they often talk about this. They talk about this together. It's really cool. I'm also very clear about race and racism with them. And they have grown up seeing people ask me, my son is brown and my daughter's more like, she says, racially ambiguous. But if I'm in, that's what she says. I'm kind of like, okay. And you look at her and you're kind of, and people will be like, he's yours, but is she yours? And I'm like, we're in the grocery store. And they've heard this from a really young age, right? And so as they've gotten older, I'm like, do you understand what just happened here? I was in the car with my daughter earlier this summer, and I was parking the car, and this lady who was parked in front of me got out of her car, and she was like, you just hit my car, rah, 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 rah. And she was very, very upset with me. I did not hit her car. And I just got really, really sweet and really quiet. I was like, oh, can you say more about where you think my car hit you? And I had to be like this. And we got in the car, and she was like, that lady never, ever would have spoken to you that way if you were a white dude. I was like, that's correct. And she was like, you couldn't get mad and tell her where to go. I was like, nope, I could not. And she was like, I see how all of this went down. So, you know, one day my son is going to be a tall brown man getting on a plane. And I'm like, you know, you're flying while brown. Like, they're going to search you. They're going to look in your stuff. Be nice. Don't talk back. And also, Asian folks have some privilege, particularly in relation to folks from other backgrounds. I'm kind of like, if you are out somewhere and there's a police interaction and you are with your Black friend, like, please understand what the police do, particularly to Black folks in this country. And you need to understand where your privilege is and how you're going to use it. So I just try to say all of the things all of the time. And maybe that they think I'm very annoying and obnoxious. And sometimes it also sinks in. So, but they are generally really proud of, like, my husband's family is originally from Russia, and they have held on to a lot of their cultural stuff. And so we do, Russian Orthodox Easter, and they celebrate Diwali, and they're like, it's really cool. We do like all the different cultural ethnic things, and then we get to eat all the foods. It's always about food.
The food is the best part. And I think you're raising such wonderful children. It sounds like from all the things you're teaching them from an early age. And I think that's, we need more of that. And yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And I'm going to pivot just a little bit because, of your policy background. I really am curious. I want to hear, like, what do you think is the biggest piece of policy work that needs to be done to help moms, especially moms of color?
That's such a good question. And gosh,
And there's no simple answer, I'm sure, but I'm just curious because of what you've seen and what you've been doing. Like, what do you think would be, and maybe you can answer as like, what would be a dream plus what would be technically feasible?
I mean, to be very honest with you, nobody likes this answer because they're like, what about access to services? I'm like, what we really need is real paid parental leave by the government. It's big, it's systems. People talk about screening and more providers of color. And I'm like, sure, sure, sure. All of that. But we're putting, it's band-aids on chest wounds. The government needs to pay for a year of parental leave for every parent. And childcare and diapers. Money and resources are going to solve a lot of problems. This is the richest country, and we just don't do enough for new parents and families. And honestly, like, so many problems would be solved if people did not have to go back to working outside the home at 4 weeks, 6 weeks, when you're not, and then trying to find childcare. And I'm not saying that all of the problems would be solved, but knowing what we know about what the risk factors are for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or just, perinatal emotional complications in a broader sense, what are all the risk factors? There's all these psychosocial factors and systemic factors around access to resources and support services. Yes, of course, there's somebody's hormonal history and mental health history. That's fine. But like, if we create programs where we're focusing on screening and access to resources, how is somebody going to actually engage with those services in a meaningful way if they have to return to work outside the home and the family at 4 or 6 weeks postpartum? It just doesn't make sense. And that's why I'm like, I want to blow it all up and burn it all down. It dismantle capitalism. But honestly, like, that's why because people are like, screening, more providers. Yes. But again, in order to get to that, you need to give people the time and the resources so they're not pushed to find childcare or return to a job outside the home and not engage with any mental health support in a meaningful way. And they're still getting up at night. I fell asleep while I was pumping once, legitimately fell asleep while I was pumping. You can cry over spilled milk.
No, it's totally like a thing. You totally will. It's like, I worked so hard for that and it's just all gone. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, to have a timeline on getting better is really hard. Healing, there's no healing timeline, right? Especially when it comes to like this physical thing you've been growing for 9 to 10 months. And then on top of that, putting a timeline on getting your, all emotional regulation all back, adjusting to this whole new parenthood thing, and then thinking like you have to go back to work. Finding childcare on top of all that, like, that's so huge. I definitely felt like for me, I couldn't even fill out the paperwork to like, extend my time off or like get my bonding leave and things like that. I didn't even realize that postpartum depression was considered a disability that I could extend for until after I had finished taking all my bonding leave, went back to work, and a coworker was like, you could have extended your disability, right? No one tells you that stuff. And I had to fight and claw tooth and nail to get that redone, to retro do all that stuff so I could take more time off to bond with my baby because I had no connection to her at all at that time. But I'm lucky, I think, and it's sad to say that I'm lucky because my state's laws allow for that extra time,
Yes.
where I know that there are
Yes.
states that don't.
Well, and in an ideal world, people should be able to do what they need to do to be the best versions of themselves, because that's good for us and it's good for our families and all of that. But it is impossible to do those things within the systemic constraints that we have. And I am so sorry that you had to go through that and then fight tooth and nail when you were vulnerable and exhausted, and now you have to advocate for yourself. It's barbaric.
Yeah. And then you just don't even get me started on like trying to reach a live person on the state disability line, because that's near impossible. I'm like, I don't understand why I can't even talk to a live person. It was ridiculous. Like, it was so hard to get through to somebody. But, that's a different soapbox.
Nobody's incentivized to pick up the phone. It's meant to be hard so that you'll give up and then go back to being like, we'll all be cogs in the capitalist machine.
Pretty much. Oh, Divya, we could talk to you forever. You have, so much good insight. And I want to at least let people know where they can find more of you. And is there any other work that you're doing that people should look out for?
Oh yes, I could talk to you forever too, and like one day we'll meet in real life, and we'll just be like, oh my god. So I'm trying to be better about social media, but it's so hard for me because I'm kind of like, this is so overwhelming. But I am on Instagram at both Brown and Therapist, all one word, because I'm like, we are holding many things at once. And on the topic of this whole like bushwhacking, how do we braid and like carve the path, I have been slowly, so slowly, and dragging myself along, trying to create this sort of bushwhacking companion workbook for bicultural first, second generation folks, around like, how do we do this and how do we braid and bushwhack. And I'm allergic to parenting books, sort of, so it's definitely not a parenting book, but it's more of like what did we learn? Is it serving us? Do we want to keep doing it? What could the braiding look like? The sort of like, you don't have to, because so much of this, the figuring this out on your own does feel very isolating. And so my goal, as a therapist, I'm like, I will walk with you through the hard place. Like, don't carry the heavy stuff alone. And so this is meant to be a sort of companion in that way.
Like a workbook.
Like a workbook.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll have to.
It's very much in the works, but it is the thing that it is like a little baby that I'm trying to grow.
Yeah. Do you sit on any boards right now?
Yes, I am on the board of PSI of Mass, the PSI of Mass chapter, and which is, it's awesome. We're in a stage of transition, but it's a wonderful group of folks, and I'm really excited about it. And this is not a board, but I also sit on the Ellen Story Commission for Postpartum Depression, which is within the state of Massachusetts. It's a special legislative committee that specifically deals with perinatal mental health. So I've been a part of that for a long time.
Wow.
So it's great to be. Yeah,
That's really cool. Like, you can make your voice
It's
heard.
really cool.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky. It's such an honor to do this work and to parent teens and to sort of look back and be like, oh yeah, that was a lot of hard things that I went through. And it's wonderful to share the story, to sort of say like a career can go through many iterations. Humans can go through many iterations, and we're always kind of learning and growing and discovering and writing new chapters. So it's exciting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And so I'm going to try to wrap up our episode. And we always end on a note that kind of talks about maybe what we're going to do for our mental health this week, like a little self-care thing, for ideas for our listeners, or, just even to brainstorm something you might want to do for this week. So I hate putting you on the spot. So I'm gonna see what I come up with. For me, I don't know if I'll get to it this week, because it kind of depends on the weather, if it's going to be raining or not. But last week, I found that this was actually pretty therapeutic. I mean, it's been raining a lot. So on the days that it's not raining, we have a lot of weeds poking through now. And it's weird that nowadays I actually find gardening and weeding and trimming down stuff quite therapeutic, because I'll like plug in my earbuds and listen to a podcast I've been wanting to listen to. And literally just on a lunch break for like half an hour, I'll just be down there pulling weeds. And it's actually kind of nice to see how it comes out so clean afterwards. And you just want to like rip out all the stuff you don't want, or like, throw away the weeds and junk in your backyard. And somehow that makes me feel quite empowered. So I'm hoping I'll get to do some of it this week on a day where it's not raining. So that's mine.
I love this. That's great. And my mother-in-law is a big gardener. I never got into it, but I hear that it's very therapeutic to like get your hands in the earth and pull stuff out and make stuff beautiful. I I am a big exerciser. It is like how I manage my nervous system, and it has just been such a wonderful saving grace for me. So I work out every morning generally, and I also take this wonderful time to sit with my coffee. I do not slug it and run all over the house, but I take a little bit of time to sit with my coffee. And I love Spelling Bee on the New York Times. It's my little like word game. So those are some things that I do in my morning before I start my day. And it's just a nice way to kind of like sit, anchor, get my nervous system in order before I do the day. So that's like the commitment that I make to myself.
I think there's something to be said about like actually tasting and enjoying what you're drinking or eating, because
Yes.
so often we're just kind of powering through lunch, trying to get to the next thing that we don't even realize what we're eating, doing it just to not be hangry later in the day. So I love that you're describing actually sitting down, and being mindful of your coffee and actually enjoying it. So that's a really great reminder. Great reminder.
Yes.
Do you play Wordle?
I do Wordle, but I love Spelling Bee because Wordle is like one and done. Whereas Spelling Bee, you come back to it through the day. It's always there for you. And it's like, I'll get a bunch of words right away. And then like, I'll come back to it. Like if I have like 7 minutes between clients, I'm not really going to do anything else, but I'll like click over and I'm like, oh, there's the pangram. And it's always annoying if I'm sitting there doing, and a child walks behind me and they're like, filthy. And I'm like, and they just sort of like do this like drive by.
Oh man, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Divya, so much for your time, sharing your time with us and all these wonderful answers. I'm sure someone's going to totally relate to a lot of these things and maybe even just like start thinking about, gosh, what is it that we really need to be doing for our moms? So thank you for the thought-provoking conversation.
It's so wonderful to be here, Jasmine. Thank you so much for having me. What a treat. And, you are really saving lives with this podcast, reaching out to AAPI folks, breaking all the stigma and silence and shame in our communities, all that stuff. Like it has to die out in the open with all of us. So thank you for being a lifeline for so many people to share their stories and to support each other.
Thank you for saying that. We're hoping to accomplish this with, making ourselves more visible and to make us feel less alone. I think that's all anybody really wants, right? Is to be seen and not to be alone, hopefully. Thank you, Divya.
Thanks, y'all, for listening to that episode with Divya Kumar. I am seriously, my heart fluttering, maybe because I too am a licensed clinical social worker. I love that we were able to talk really deeply about racism and how that can play such a huge role in maternal mental health. And it's just really great that we were able to dive into a lot of different things with Divya, including parenting and how that continues on, parenting with teens, and just also her postpartum experience. I think I really resonated with a lot of the things that she went through. I hope this episode really spoke to a bunch of our listeners out there. And remember the resources we have. Check out the show notes for more links to look into getting any support you need from PSI. Remember, that stands for Postpartum Support International. And thanks again for being our listeners. We couldn't do it without you.
We hope you have enjoyed Healing the Tigress in our conversations on maternal mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Please follow our show and our Instagram page to catch our latest episodes. We have so many fantastic guests and deep topics that we are so excited to cover soon.
If you enjoyed this episode or would like to support us more, please leave us a rating or a review and share this podcast with a friend to spread the word. Check out the show notes for more links. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope these conversations will help our AAPI mothers heal their inner tigress and honor their mental health as they deserve to. See you next time.